Hi everyone, am I audible? Can someone just confirm whether I'm audible or
Yes,
not?
ma'am, you're audible.
Okay, perfect. So what we are going to do in today's lab is, in last lab we have looked at certain basic programs in recursion. Is binary search done in your theory classes?
Which concept, ma'am?
Binary search.
Binaries.
Searching in an array. What all have you covered in arrays? Anyone? I'm waiting for the response.
All those insertion and deletion and rotation.
Okay, so today I'll introduce you to a concept called binary search in an array, which is basically searching for a number in array, but it is different from a linear search. And I'm introducing that because it uses the concept of recursion. So the program will give you a hints on how you can use recursion with your arrays. So we have done it with the basic data types, but not with arrays. So I'll quickly finish that. And after that, we'll devote this entire lab to the understanding of pointers and dynamic memory allocation. Because after this, whatever topics are coming up, even in your theory classes, like linked list, trees, graphs, all of them will be based on pointers. So you should be very comfortable with pointers. So I'll start with binary search now. Okay, I hope you are able to see my screen. So in general, I'll tell you what is the, I'll write a pseudo code for how do you do a program for binary search. And after that, I'll give you some time to code it. And if you'll face some problem, I'll help you. So how do you generally search for an element in an array? Assume you are given an array and you are given an element which you have to search in this array. How do you proceed? People, you have covered arrays in the class, so I expect an answer for this. It's a very simple question. So given an element, how do you search it in an array? How do you return the index of this element? Let's say I give you an array of 100 numbers and I give you some element, let's say 5. I ask you to search 5 in this array and return me the index of this element 5. How do you do that?
Just use for loop and start seeing from the first element and all.
Right. So you do a linear scan. You apply a for loop which runs from, let's say, I from 0 to n, and at every step it searches, and as soon as it sees a 5, it returns the index. Okay. Can we make this approach smarter? Assume that the array which we have given to you, it is already in an ascending order. So ascending order means when you move across this array, so the elements are in increasing order. So it can be an array like, let's say, 2, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12. So your arrays, we say it is sorted. And now in this sorted array, you are asked to search a number, right? Can you think of a better approach? So let's say here I've given you an element and I've asked you to search it. So definitely here also you can use a linear approach. Start from the first element, trace the array, and as soon as you find that element, return that. Can you use a smarter approach? Okay, think of it as if it's an array of 1,000 numbers. And I asked you to search a number in this array. How will you proceed? Let me give you a better example. Let's say I give you a dictionary. So dictionary is nothing, but it has a large collection of words, right? So assume that all these words are part of your array. And in this dictionary, I ask you to search for a certain word. So how do you do that? Do you do a linear scan?
The first digit, whatever it is.
So let's say I give you this Oxford dictionary, which is very heavy, and I ask you to, let's say, search the meaning of some element in this. Let's say I want you to search the meaning of, let's say, any word.
The first alphabet.
Is it? So I ask you to search for the word called pencil. How do you search for the meaning of pencil? So you have just a dictionary in your hand. So
Uh,
do you start looking from the first page in the dictionary, starting from A, then B, then C, and so on and so forth, go all the way up to pencil, or do you do any other thing?
uh, Start with the words P.
Okay, so how can you directly start with the word P? How do you know when? So definitely, when you'll open this dictionary, you'll open a particular page. How do you ensure that this page starts as all the words which start with P?
I use index, the starting page.
Okay. Uh, okay, how do you generally do this? So do not think of the technicalities involved. Just take it as a daily real world examples. I've just given you a dictionary and I'm asking you to search for the meaning of a word. Don't you just open it randomly at any page?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I asked you the meaning of pencil. You just open it and maybe the page which you are having has words which are starting from R, right? So you know that P comes before R. So now you know that you have to search in the pages which are before all those pages which are having this R, right? So you can ignore that remaining part of the dictionary. So let's say I opened it and all the words start here with R. And I know that the word I'm looking for is pencil, which is definitely in the first portion. So now if I look my dictionary as first portion and second portion. So first portion is all the words up to R, the word which I'm currently holding, and the other portion is all the words after that particular page. So since I have to search for pencil, I know that it's in my first half. So I can completely discard that second half. And now in this remaining, what I do, I again open some random page. That's how we do it generally. So can you think of how we can apply that concept here to searching an element in an array? So let's say I'm given an array of 1,000 numbers and I'm told that all these numbers are in the sorted order. And I'm asked to search for a number, let's say 16. So how do I search it in the array?
Select a random number.
Definitely. So we can select a random number. So instead of selecting a random number, what we are going to do, since we know the size of the array, I'll pick up the middle element. So you can definitely do it with random number also. So what we are going to do, just pick up this middle number of the array. So in this case, 6 is the middle number, right? I look at this number 6 and you look at the number which you were searching for. So assume that the number I was searching for was 12, right? So I know that 12 is greater than 6. So what you can do, discard this left half right away. So I know that 12 is going to be somewhere in the right half, right? So I know that now I have to search only in this portion of the array. Now while searching in this portion of the array, you can repeat the same procedure. So again, just go to the middle element in this array. And in this particular case, this middle element right away is your 12. Okay, so how do you implement it recursively? So do you notice recursion here? What we are doing at every step? So let's bring it in light of the example which we took in the previous lectures. Again, assume that I'm sitting in a hall and somebody came and gave this very big array to me and they gave me an element. They asked me to search for this element. So what I'm going to do, assume that this is this big array which is given to me and I have to search for an element in this array. And again, it is given to me that this array is sorted, right? So what I'll do, I'll just look at the middle element of this array, right? If this middle element is the element I'm searching for, I am done. Otherwise, what I want to do, I pass this entire array to one person and ask him to search in this array and this particular portion of this array to the second person and ask them to search for the element in this second half. And again, what these two people will do, they will do the same thing. So as we discussed, right, recursion is sort of a lazy approach where nobody wants to do the work. So when this person got here half of this array, this person will also just look at this middle element here, right? And if he gets the element I'm searching for, he's going to return that element, return the index. Otherwise, what he will do, he can again divide it in two parts and give it to two other people, right? Okay. But see again, since here in this case, we know that the array is sorted. So assume that the number I saw here, it was 100. And the element I'm searching for, let's say it is 200. So I know that my element is not in this first half. So I actually need not give any work to this person here, right? So I can just check off this entire work for the one person sitting here. And this later chunk I will pass to the some other person for searching. Now this other person in the array which he receives again looks at the middle element, and let's say this middle element is 300. We are searching for 200. So what this person will do, discard this half and he will give this portion to a third person to search for, and this process will continue. So let's just take a quick example and understand it how it works. So I'm randomly going to take some numbers here. So all of these are going to be in the sorted order. Okay. Assume that this is the array given to me and I have to search for the element 150. So how will things proceed? Which is the middle element here? So this 120 is the middle element here. So I know that I'm searching for 150, which is greater than 120. So now this array is passed in the recursive loop. So the second person here receives this array. So now our aim is to search in these four numbers. Okay, what is the middle element in these four numbers? Let me just slightly change it. Let me make it 160, what I'm searching for. So let's say when I look here, so this, since this is even, so you can take any of 150 or 160 to be the middle element. So let's say I looked at 150 is the middle element. Now this person is searching for 160. So he will pass this to another person, right? You will again divide it in two parts. Look at the middle element. Since there are only two elements, so you can assume that this one is your middle element, right? And he can return the index of this element 160 here. So what's going to be the base case here? So did you understand what I just did here?
Two elements, base case.
Okay, so you can again do it in two ways. You can take the base case when you have two elements, or you can even take the base case when you have one element. So what I'm doing here is whenever my number of elements is even, right? So I'll have two elements in the middle. So let's say my number of elements is 10. So which two elements will be in the middle? Let's say I have these 10 elements. So these are their indices. Which two elements are there in the middle?
4 and 5.
I think 4 and 5 are there in the middle. So in this case, we can set up a logic and we can say if two elements are there in the middle, take the first of them to be the middle element. So in this case, what will happen? I'll say that 160 is the middle element. So if I found the middle element, well, I'm done. Assume that what if I was looking for 200? Again, this person will say, for me, 160 is the middle element. 200 is greater than 160. So he will pass this 200 to one other person. Now you can make this base case to be just one element also. So you can do it in any way. So you can make a base case out of one element, or you can even make a base case out of two elements. Okay. So how do you actually write a code for this? What needs to be returned? We need to return the location of that element, the index of that element. So if at every time we are breaking our array in two sub-arrays and then passing it, that will not serve our purpose. So let's say I just broke this array. So I know that the indices in this origin, these were the indices. So if I break this array and pass this 5, 6, 7, 8 as another array, this will cause a problem because it's a new array and its index will again start from 0, 1, 2, 3. But what I want the index of 8 in my original array. So what we do for that? So binary search is actually a base for a lot of recursive algorithms in arrays. Even let's say the first programming assignment which we gave to you, counterfeit coin problem, you can, once you understand binary search, that's like a cakewalk. So what we do to implement this? Instead of subdividing the arrays, what we do, you assume that, so when you are passing this work onto the second person here, you do not pass him this divided array. So at every step, what we are passing is, so let's say I'm writing my recursive function. So this is my recursive function. At every step, instead of passing the subdivided array, I am passing the entire array A. So this is my array A. I'm passing this entire array. However, what I'm giving is, to that person, what are the beginning and ending locations for him to search, right? So I tell him that you do not have to search for the element in this entire array. Your work is just to look at the what is the beginning index, what is the ending index, and you need to search only between these two indices, and you need to search for the element ELT. And what this function will return? This function is returning the index, so its return type will be int. Okay, so how do we actually implement this function? Can you think of what should be there in the body of this function? Can you help me with this? Okay, before that, one more question to you. Since you are studying complexity, can you tell me how many comparisons this code will do? What will be its complexity? Okay, we'll come to the complexity part. Let's finish off with this function. Okay, how do I start with the body of this function? So initially, when I call this function, what will be beginning? When I call this function from main, I have to search in the entire array. So initially your beginning will be 0 and end will be n minus 1 because I want to search in the entire array. So this is what is given to me as my job. Okay, what I want to do now, I want to compare this element with the middle element and I want to see whether it matches. So how do we write that? So you calculate middle. So if you carefully observe it, you can calculate the value of middle as something like beginning plus n minus beginning by 2. Right? So you should notice here why I haven't written it directly as end by 2. I haven't written directly as end by 2 because every time this is going to be a recursive call and the value of beginning will not be 0 in every call. So the value of beginning will keep changing with every recursive call. Okay. So if you look at this middle element, if this a of middle, it is equal to your element, what this function will do? It will return mid because mid is my element. Otherwise, what we'll do? We'll compare this a of mid with this element. So if my element is less than a of mid, which means I have to search the left half, else I have to search the right half. Okay, for searching the left half, what will be my recursive call now? What I'm going to call here? I need to call function of A. What is my beginning location? I'm searching in the left half. So what will change?
End will change.
End will change. So your beginning remains the same. Your end becomes mid and we are still searching for this element. If it is right half, then again you will call function. Your beginning
Mid
will change. Beginning will become mid, right? Your end will
and
remain the same, and your element. Are we done or something is left? So in this entire case, we talked about the recursive case. We have still not talked about the base case. So what will be your base case? Base case is when you have just one element. And what happens when you have just one element? You should notice that your beginning becomes equal to end when you have just one element. So if your beginning equals to end, so you just check this location A of beginning. So if you find your element here, it means you can return that location. If you do not find your element here, you can return -1, stating that I haven't found the element. Any doubt still here?
Ma'am, could you explain the last part?
Beginning equals to end 1.
Yes.
Okay, so beginning equals to end is your base case. So what happens? I have divided this array into half part, and I have given this half part to someone else for searching. And that someone else is again dividing into half and giving it to someone else. So this process will keep repeating, and the person at the very end, so there will be a person who will receive just one element. So as soon as let's say I am that person again back who receives that one element, so I cannot divide it into any particular and into another half, right? So I cannot keep working on that recursive case here, that divide it in half and give the first half to one person and so on. So what I need to do is I need to recognize that once there is only one element left in the array, I just have to see whether this is my required element or not. So this one corresponds to that. So in that case, what will happen? So I'll just do it with an example. In that case, your beginning will become equal to end. Let's do that in this particular example. Just give me a minute. Okay. Assume that we are searching for this number 200. So I'm taking the worst case here. We are searching for this number 200, right? So what was my algorithm? My algorithm said that, so this is a function. The function is returning an integer, and the input it is taking is a, let's say beginning, and the end, and the element or the item which I am searching, right? So in case, I'm writing it in short, if your beginning becomes equals to end, I just compare whether I have found the element or not. If I have found the element, I'll return the index here. If I haven't found the element, I'll return a -1. If this is not the case, if beginning is not equals to end, I'll calculate the mid. I'll compare this mid with my element. And again, if I found the element at that mid location, I'll return this mid because the mid is going to be my index. If that is not the case, I'm going to compare. So if my element is less than a of mid, I'm again going to call this function, and this time this function will go to run from, since I'm searching in the left half, so it becomes b mid I. And if it is in the right half, so if the element is greater than a mid, I'm going to call a mid and I. Okay, let's quickly implement this on this array and see. So what will happen initially? Initially from the main, we are going to call f of a, beginning is 0, right? End is 8, and the element I'm searching for is 200. So this is the function call which is received from main. What this function is going to do? So it first checks whether beginning is equal to end or not. So definitely at this time, beginning is not equals to end. So it calculates mid. So what is mid in this case? So mid is 4. See whether your element is at the middle location or not. So 200 is not present at the fourth location. Perfect. Then I check whether my element is smaller than or bigger than mid of 4. So my element is bigger than mid of 4. So what this function is going to call now? This function is going to call A. Now my beginning will shift to mid. So now my beginning becomes 4 and remains 8, and still element I'm searching for is 200. So this is the call invoked here. What this f of a for 8200 does? Again, beginning is not equals to end. So at every time I'm first checking for my base case, whether there is just one element which I'm looking for. So here again, your beginning is not equals to end. Then calculate your mid again. So mid in this case is between 4 and 8. Let's say mid is 6, right? So you can look for these exact calculations. How do you exactly find mid? And you can do some small changes here. So since I have actually looked at that the value is not present at mid of 4, I can start it from a of 5. So you can actually set it to mid plus 1 also. So you can make some those smaller changes yourself. I'm just telling you the basics of it. So now my mid is 6, right? So look at whether your element is present at a of 6. No, still not. My element is what? It is greater than a of 6. So what I'm going to call again? I'm going to call f of a 6, 8, 200, right? Again, I'm going to calculate the mid. Now mid is going to be 7. My element is still not present at a of 7. My element is bigger than a of 7. So what I'm going to call? F of a 7, 8, 200, right? Again, you calculate the mid, and let's say your logic is such that it sets now mid to 7. So again, your element is not present at mid of 7. It is greater than this. Did I do some mistake here? So here you can keep a base case for 2 elements, I think. Otherwise, you can search from mid plus 1. Just give me a second, somebody's here. Okay, I guess I did a small mistake here. So instead of starting from the mid, you can actually be starting from mid plus 1 here. So it can be a mid plus 1 here, right? So in this case, your mid is 4. Next time when you will call it, it will start from 5. And then in the next case, so between 5 and 8, what will be the mid? Let's say it is mid is your 7 here. So again, you do not find the element at mid of 7. So you start it from mid plus 1 to end. So now you start it from 8 to 8. So when this function sees here 8 and 8 both becomes equal. So your beginning equals to end. It means that this last person is searching only for one element here, right? So he will check whether this element is present at a of 8. Since it is present, he will return 8. Otherwise, he would have returned a minus 1. And this minus 1 would back propagate. How many steps do you think this algorithm will take? So whenever I am encountered with a function call, we are actually doing how many comparisons? One comparison here, one comparison here, one comparison here, maybe around 3 comparisons. So every time we call this function, we make around 3 comparisons, right? So how many times do you think this function call will be invoked? So definitely if you find this element somewhere in between, so that will be your number of steps, but assume that this chain goes as long as it can. So what can be the maximum length of this chain? How many function calls will you invoke? What is happening each time? So first time you are at the
Ma'am, n
anyone
by
wants
2 times it can happen.
Okay, is it n by 2?
Ma'am, like the where n is the total size of the array.
Okay, n is the total size of the array. So let's say this total size of the array is n, right? So I looked at the middle element and I figured out that it's not the element which I want. So what I'm doing, I'm breaking this array in two parts, right? And I'm passing this remaining array to one person. So I was searching in n elements. Now this new person, he is searching in n by 2 elements. So this new person, he'll again divide this array into two parts. He'll pass it to the third person. He will be searching in n by 4 elements. Next person will be searching in n by 8 elements. Next person will be searching in n by 16 element, right? Till when this search will keep going on? Are you getting it? So initially we had n elements. So first function was searching it. The first function call was searching the element in this array size of n. This function divided this array into half, and now when this function calls itself again, this function copy, it is searching that particular element in actually n by 2 elements, because my first n by 2 elements have been removed. Now again we divide it into half, and then this one is passed again to the another function copy, which will be searching it in n by 2 square elements. The next function call will be searching it in n by 2 to the power 4 elements. So what can be this maximum value here? Do you see? So every time it is the number of elements in which we have to search is being divided by 2. So we said that which will be the last function call when there will be just one element. So let's say the last function call is kth function call, right? So in kth function call, you are just searching in one element. So what happens at that time? This n by 2 to the power k is nothing but 1. So can you say something about the value of k? What is k? You just need to apply some simple mathematics here.
Something in terms of log.
Something in terms of log. So it's straightforward. So you take this like this. You take log both sides. So log n equals to. So I'm taking base 2 k log 2 base log 2. So this is 1. So your value of k becomes log 2n. So this entire process is done log n times. So you are going, this function is going to call itself at max log n times. Every time you are calling this function, you are doing 3 comparisons. So your total number of comparisons becomes 3 log n, which is nothing but order of log n. So that is your complexity of binary search. I'm giving you some 5 minutes to think about it. If there is some doubt, you can ask me, and maybe after this lab, you can try coding this. So if you see that there might be some issue in coding this, think about it in next 5 minutes and you can get back to me with any questions. After that, I'll start with pointers. No doubts? I'll move on. Okay. So we are done with the arrays. Now we'll be starting with altogether a new topic, so which is the uses of pointers and dynamic memory allocation. So you need to make sure that you are comfortable with this because your now and all the assignments will be based on that. So I think we have already discussed about pointers in one of the previous class. So to just make you more comfortable with pointers, let's just solve a few basic questions which are based on pointers, and after that we'll start with the dynamic memory allocation. Okay. So these are a few questions I have picked up from the past GATE exams. Generally, if you give interview for any company or any competitive exam, so pointers questions are definitely there. Can you think of the solution to this? What is happening here? Can you tell me line by line what is happening in the memory? Let's start it from the very basics. What happens when you declare a variable in the memory? Let's say I have a program and in main I have this statement int a. What does this do? What's the outcome of this?
On the CPU, will go to the RAM, adjust its memory to 4 bytes, and name it as A, and
Perfect.
make store only integer.
Perfect. So if you assume that this is your memory as a sequence of blocks where each block is 1 byte long. So since integer requires 4 bytes, so 4 blocks will be given to your integer a. So these 4 blocks will be for a, and you can access these 4 blocks with the help of a name, which here is a. Okay, perfect. So what happens when we execute this code? So initially we have made an array which is of size 5. What happens when you declare an array? So we know that now there are 5 elements in this array. So how much memory we need? 5 into 4, 20 bytes. So your 20 bytes of memory are allocated somewhere in the array, right? And what is this ARR? So this
A
A
point.
here, it was just a name, right? Yes. So ARR is a pointer here, and where it is pointing, so these 20 bytes which have been allocated to you, the address of the first byte here. So let's just give it some address. Let's assume that its address is 213, right? So this ARR is a pointer which holds this address 213. What does that mean? ARR is a variable which is a pointer. So ARR definitely is also stored somewhere in your memory, right? And the value of this ARR is this pointer. So let's say this is ARR, it will have 213 inside it, which is the address of your first byte of this array that will be held by ARR. Okay, what happens next? So we create one more pointer PTR1, which is again somewhere else in the memory, right? So a pointer can have 4 bytes or 8 bytes depending on your system. So somewhere here is your PTR1, which is a pointer, which is again holding 4 bytes of memory. And what is the value in PTR1? It is nothing but the address of your 0th element of the array, which is what? 213. So even this PTR1, the value inside this PTR1 is 213. So an easy way of denoting this is just as we can say that PTR1 is pointing to this 213. That indirectly means that the value present inside this PTR1 in our memory is this 213. Okay. Something went wrong. Are you able to see my screen? Okay, what happens when you do void star PTR2? You get all the more one new variable PTR2, and the value in this PTR2 is PTR1 plus 3. What does that mean? So PTR2 is PTR1 plus 3, and we know that PTR1 is 213. So is PTR2 213 plus 3, which is 216? Anyone?
213 plus 12, I guess.
Okay. So what are you assuming the size of a float to be?
4 bytes each element.
Okay. Let's say the size of a float is 4. So you should note here. So whenever, so this thing is very important. So whenever we declare a pointer type of a variable, so pointer also has some type, which can be a float, char, int, or anything. So whenever you add some integer to a pointer, so let's say I have this pointer, which is p, and I'm adding an integer here plus 1. So what it will actually do, it will advance it to the size of that particular element. So if it was an integer, you will go to the next integer. If it was a character, you will go to the next character. So what indirectly we are saying here is PTR2 is PTR1. So PTR1 is currently pointing here. And when you add 3 to it, so since you know that it is a float type of a number and you have stored many floats here, it will go to the next float number, not to the next byte location. If there is any doubt, you must clarify it. So where will it go? So assuming the size of a float is 4, so PTR1 is nothing but 213. PTR1 plus 1 is 213 plus 4, which is 217. PTR1 plus 2 is again all the more 4 steps further, which is 221. And then PTR1 plus 3, it goes to 224. 25. Okay. So what you are printing here is star PTR2. So again, you should not get confused here. So these two notations. So here also you have a star PTR and here also you have a star PTR, or let's say here, right? So first time when you declare any pointer type of a variable, this star is used to denote that it's a pointer variable. Once you have used this star PTR1 notation, after this particular step, wherever you use this notation star PTR1, you are actually referring to the value at this address. So PTR1 is storing the address 213. So after this particular point of your program, wherever you say star PTR1, you are talking about the value which is stored at this address 213. So what you are printing is star PTR2, that is the value at this address of PTR2. And what is that? So your PTR1 was pointing here to the address of this element. PTR2 was your PTR1 plus 3, which will actually point here, right? So this is your PTR1, which is same as your ARR. Both of them are pointing here. PTR2 is pointing here. So when you look at star PTR2, it shows you the value stored at that location, which is 90.5. And when you do PTR2 minus PTR1, so I think you have already done it when you were studying how to look at the number of elements in an array. So it tells you the number of elements between this PTR2 and PTR1. Okay. If you understand pointers well, you can definitely give an answer to this question. So this one is a bit tricky. I want to show you this completely at once. Let me see. Okay. Can you think of what is happening here? Okay, I'll give these questions to you as homework exercises. If you have some doubts in pointers, you can still ask me. If there is something which is confusing, can you solve this example? So in our last lab, we discussed about pointer to pointers also. Okay, let's quickly do this. So in main, you have three variables. So one is your simple variable C, one is your pointer, which is B, integer type of pointer, and another is your pointer to pointer, which is A. So let's say that this is the memory which is given to C, this is the memory which is given to B, and this is the memory which is given to A. By the way, what is the size of your pointer? The size of your integer is 4 bytes. What about pointer?
4.
Okay. Any different answer other than 4?
8 bytes.
Okay. It can be 4 or 8 depending on your system. So on 32-bit systems, it is 4. On 64-bit systems, it is 8. Okay. So the value of C is 4 here. Then B holds the address of C. So whatever is the address of C comes in B. So I'm not writing it here. Instead, what I'm going to do is this B is pointing to C, right? Which indirectly means what I'm saying here is B holds the address of C. So B is pointing to C. And then we have A. A has some value, but A is pointing to the address of B. A is holding the address of B, which means A is pointing to B. So till now there is no problem. This is an integer. This is a pointer, integer type of a pointer, which is pointing to an integer. And this is a pointer to a pointer, which is pointing to B. Okay. Now what your code is printing, it is calling f of CBA. So here you should look at the difference between call by value and call by pointers. So see what is happening. So here I have passed this value C from my function. So what happens? Whatever is the value of C gets copied to X here. So this particular function, it doesn't know anything about C. It knows only about X. And this function knows that for this function, the value of X is 4 because the value of C has been passed from here. Okay. B is passed to another variable, which is star py. What does that mean? So B was a pointer, right? And what was the value of B? Value of B was the address of C. Now please note that not the address of X. So let's say the address of C here was 40. So B was actually holding 40 here, which was the address. Generally these are in hexadecimal. So let me write a D40 here. So let's say the address of B is D40. So this address B is passed to another variable, which is star py. So I have this function creates one more variable, right? This is a pointer type of variable, which is py, but the value inside this pointer type of variable is D40, which means that where is it pointing? It is still pointing to this C here. Okay, what about A? A is a pointer to pointer which was holding the address of B. Assume that the address of B was E40. So A here had an E40 inside it. This E40 is now passed to this double pointer PPZ. So let's say this is my double pointer PPZ, which this function made. And this double pointer gets the value of A, which was E40, which means where it is pointing? It is pointing to this B here. If you understand this example, I don't think you'll ever face any problem with pointers. Okay. Then we have two new variables inside this function, two new local variables, y and z. So I have a y here. I do not know what is its value. And I have a z here. Again, I do not know what is its value. Next, what we are doing, we are incrementing the value of star ppz by 1. What does that mean? So star ppz is double time dereferencing. So ppz is here. Star ppz means where ppz is pointing, which is at D40, this B. And once you take double star, again you go to the address where B is pointing. So you come to C here. So when you do this star ppz plus equals to 1, actually this value of C now it gets incremented and it changes to 5. So please note that here is a change in C. Okay. What next? This z here. Z is a local variable of this function. it gets the value of star star ppz. So star star ppz is actually pointing to C. So Z indirectly gets that value of C here, which is 5. Then you increment the value of star py by 2. So again, where is your py pointing? It is again pointing to C here. So this value gets all the more incremented to 7. So this is done. And then y gets the value of that star py, which became 7. So this y here, it becomes 7. What next happens? X equals to x plus 3. So x is a local variable of this function. So x becomes x plus 3, which means x plus 7. And then you return x plus y plus z. So this function is going to return your 7 plus y, which was 7, plus z, which is your 5. If there is any doubt in this particular example, you can ask me.
Ma'am, can you explain star star ppz plus equal to 1 once again?
Okay. So if you look at star star ppz, so no, look at it like this. So I'm going to write it like this: star of ppz and again a star of this, right? So what is ppz? ppz is nothing but E40, right? E40, which is this address of this B here. So ppz is E40. So when you say a star of E40, it means that you are going to look at what value is stored inside this E40. So you go here, you look at what value is stored inside this E40. For that, you come all the way here to this E40, and you see that the value stored inside this E40 is this D40, which was nothing but your address of C, right? So this becomes D40. What now needs to be done? Star of D40. It means you are going to go to this address D40 and you are going to look at what is the value inside that address. So from here you go to this address D40, which was the address of C, and you look at this value here, which is 5. So actually it star star ppz here is nothing but it means C here, because this ppz, it is pointing to your B here, and B, it is pointing to your C. So star star ppz means nothing but C. So this entire thing actually becomes C plus equals to 1. I cannot exactly say like that because this function here knows nothing about C. But what we are talking about here is the value which is present at this address D40. So although you cannot use the name C inside this function, but what you can use is if somehow you pass the address of C, so you can use that address to make some changes. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Tell me one more thing. I'll just. So generally we declare an array like this. I can just. Okay. We declare an array like this. Let's say it's an array of size 100. What if I try to do some changes to A of 103? What will happen? Let's say I do a scanf with A103, or I try to do a print with A103.
Error.
Will it be error, or will your program execute but show you some invalid results? So again, it is dependent on your compilers. So when you do a A100, so again your 400 bytes are reserved in the memory and you get that address of that first byte in your pointer A. So when you try to access A103, it might be an error on some compilers, but generally we use GCC. So if you are using GCC and even the compiler which is used in your code blocks, so if at any of those places, if you use this A103, it will actually try to access that location. Now, depending on whether that location is being used by some other program, if it is not being used, you can still access it and use it. If it is being used by some other program, then your code can just end abruptly. So I'm again giving you some 5 minutes of time. So think about arrays and pointers. If you have any doubt of any kind with arrays or pointers, you can ask me. And after that, I'll start with 4 dynamic memory allocation systems. Okay, I have some comments in the chat box I just saw. So definitely if you do not have the elements in ascending order, you'll have to do a linear search. You can use some other methods, but no method will give you a better complexity than order of n. It has to be order of n. Only if you have the elements in ascending order, you can make it order log n. Because if you do not know anything about the order of elements, you'll have to look every element at least once, which makes your complexity of the order n. Any doubts, you can ask me.
Ma'am, what if you have same element 2 times in an array, like 2 in same array?
Then it depends on what is the expected output. So sometimes you can be asked to return the first occurrence of that element, the index of the first occurrence of that element. In some other cases, you might be asked to print all the indices. Then you have to think how can you modify that code. Let's say it's binary search and you know that an element can be duplicated. So how do you use that? So how you will do that? So we know that once when is our function returning when it finds that element at the middle of the array. But then if you know that there can be duplications, you cannot simply return once you find that element at the middle, because you know there can be more occurrences of this element. You will still have to proceed until you make sure that there are no duplicate entries. So for that, in if this array is your ascending order, is in your ascending order, I would say in that case it's in a non-decreasing order. Then you might want to, once you find an element in the middle, you might want to look at the left and the right side of left and the right side elements. If both of them are different elements, as in one is lesser, other is greater, you can return. Otherwise, you'll have to keep this code going on again recursively. So you will stop only when you find an element, the left of which is smaller than this and the right of this is larger than this. Only in that case you can return. Otherwise, you'll have to keep going with your function call. Any other doubts? Okay, so I'll start with dynamic memory allocation. We'll just finish this today. Next week onwards, we'll be starting with your structures and linked list. Have linked list been started in your theory classes?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so maybe this week you will read about them. So in the next lab, we'll go about how we can code them. Okay. Just going to share my screen. Second. Okay, I hope you can see my screen now. Okay. So you are able to see my screen, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Generally, we were declaring our arrays like this, right? So what is the problem with this kind of a declaration? Let's say the task at hand is I have an institute which has some students, let's say some 2000 students, and I want to record the marks of all these students. So for that purpose, we were using an array. So maybe an array of size, let's say 2000 here, which can hold entries corresponding to the 2000 students. Okay, what if before executing this code, right at the time when I'm writing this code, I do not know what size of an array do I need? What will I do in that case? Assume that I'm compiling this code, but I have no idea of how many students are there in the university. Only when I'm going to execute this code, someone can tell me that this is the number of students and accordingly I can give it. So what's the solution to this? Tell me you have done it already. So I don't know what is the size of this array. Somebody will tell me at the execution time of this program what is the size. Can I take size as an input from the user?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, right? Definitely. So we have done that. So what I can do is, so till now what we have done is you take an integer n here, you can scan the value of this n, or maybe you can take it from the command line arguments. You ask this from the user and then you declare an array of size n, right? This is allowed again on your GCC compilers, but not on all the compilers. So not every compiler allows you to do this. So there are a lot of compilers out there which will show an error if you create such a program that you are taking an integer n, scanning its value and then trying to create an array of an element. When C was initially created, so the condition was when you have to create an array, you need to explicitly state how many elements are there in this array, right at the time when you are declaring it, otherwise it will throw you an error. So that is one reason why you use something called dynamic memory allocation. There is one more reason of that. The other reason is, okay, I took this n and let's say you told me that there are 1000 students in the college and I took that value of n here. So now I have this array, let's say n was 1000, which is having 1000 students. So I can record 1000 numbers here. What if somewhere across when you are running this program, so what if somewhere across this program I need to change this number n? So I definitely know that if this array is of size 1000 and later on if I try to access something like let's say 1003, it can create a big mess, right? I'm not allowed to do that. So I have been allocated 4000 bytes. I cannot go out of those 4000 bytes and access something like this. So what if while I'm running this program and you tell me that there are 50 more entries in the institute, so we need to increase the size of this array by 50, or you tell me that 50 students have left the college and we need to decrease the size of this array by 50. So if you use this kind of a memory allocation, it is called a static memory allocation, which is done at compile time. So for now I am writing it like this. So let's say if you have something like this and you have declared an array which is of size 1000, nowhere in your program after this fifth line in this case you can increase or decrease the size of this A. So if you want to have programs where you can take some input from the user later on and based on the input of the user you want to increase or decrease the size of the array. So for that we have a concept which is called dynamic memory allocation. So dynamic is something which is done at the runtime. We have 4 functions. So all these 4 functions are actually contained in this std lib file, and these 4 functions, have you heard of them before? Anyone? So these are the 4 functions. So malloc and calloc, they are used to allocate the memory. Realloc is used to, like I said, either reduce the amount of memory which is associated with array or to increase it, and the use of free we'll see later on. Okay. So I'm starting off with the malloc function. So what does your malloc? So you know what does this particular call does here is, it finds a contiguous block of 4000 bytes in your memory, allocates it and returns you a pointer A to the first location. There is another way to do this. So we have a function called malloc. What this function will do, malloc, or you can also call it malloc. What this function does is, you can specify here how many bytes of memory you want. So see, this is slightly different than this. So here whatever memory will be provided to your system, it will be on the basis of 4 times of the number you give here. But with the help of malloc, you can even allocate this many bytes of memory. You just have to indicate here how many bytes you want, and this function will do it for you. So it will go to your memory, it will find out one chunk, one contiguous chunk of this size, right? And what it will do, what it should return to you, it will return you exactly like this, the address of the first byte. So all out of these 65,079 bytes, whatever is the address of the first byte, that is returned to you. What will be its return type if it is returning an address? It will return you a pointer, right? Because pointers are the variables which contain addresses. So this malloc function will return you a pointer. Okay, what kind of a pointer can it return you? So see, this guy malloc here, it doesn't know for what purpose are you going to use this memory. You have just told this function that I know I need this much of a memory, but you are not telling it whether you will use it for integer array or character array or whatsoever. So it really doesn't know what kind of a pointer it should return to you, whether it should be an int, float or char. So what it generally does is, it returns you a void type of a pointer. Like in functions we have void when we do not know of any particular data type, so we use this void here. So it's going to return you a void type of a pointer, right? So I've just written here a simple statement. So this function allocates this many bytes in the memory and it returns you a void pointer. Let's print this value of this void pointer and see. Okay, so here I am printing this value of this pointer here, and I want to see the value of p. Let's just execute it. Did I make some mistake? Can someone quickly verify? I'm unable to trace the error, some syntax error. Okay, I don't have a int main here. So when I execute it, so it shows me a pointer. Okay, so if you see the length of this pointer, in my case, it is one 8-digit long hexadecimal number. Okay, based on this hexadecimal number, which is 8-digit long, can you comment something on the size of my memory? So I'm telling you that a pointer or a address in my system, it's a 8-digit long hexadecimal number. Can you tell me how much long my memory is? So you should think about it. I leave it as a homework exercise. Okay. So although we got a pointer, this pointer is of your type void, right? So since we'll be using this memory to allocate some integers, characters or float type of numbers to it, we need to typecast it. So currently, let's say if I try to look at what is the value at this particular address, so I don't know what type of a value it will hold. Let me assume that it is integer, and let me try to see what value is stored at this pointer p. Right? So when I try doing this, I get an error. So the error is my pointer is of type void. So I need to typecast this pointer. So what do? Is I create a new pointer here. Let's say p int, right? And I typecast this void pointer here into a int type of a pointer, and I write a p here. And then I try to see what is the value present at this p int. Okay. So this should be an integer type of a pointer since I'm typecasting it from the void. This p int is an integer type of a pointer. Okay. So this is the value of my pointer and this is some garbage integer value which is stored at that location here. Okay. So I can do this entire thing here also. So I can typecast it directly here. So if I want this star p to be an integer type of pointer, so this malloc 6579 allocates these many bytes in your memory, and then you typecast this pointer to a int star type of a pointer, and I can actually remove all this and I can make it a star p here. Okay. What we are trying to do, we are actually trying to replace this entire thing with the help of a code which allocates the memory dynamically, right? So what I can do here is, let's say my n was the number which tells me how many elements I want in my memory, and let me just take it as an input from your command line. So I take it as an input from your command line. So what should I write here? How much space do I want? So I want n integers and each of the integers is going to take 4 bytes, right? So I want n into, so I can either write a 4 here or I am going to use an operator which is a size of operator. So you can pass any data type here and this size of operator will tell you the size of that particular data type. So I have here n into size of int. Now, and even here I can write it as a of n. So now your statements 8 and 9, they actually exactly do the same thing. So what your statement 9 is doing, it allocates you 4n bytes in the memory and a points to the first address there. What does this statement does? It also allocates you 4n bytes in the memory and your first address is returned to this pointer star of p here. So I'm just going to remove this thing. So after this point, you can treat this p actually as an array of integers, and this array of integers has n number of elements. And you can also access those elements the same way as you do with arrays. So what I can do here is, let's say I have an integer here I. I want to see what are the elements present at these locations. So you can run this I loop here. And what I can do here is, let me just print the elements. And what should I write here is pi. So you refer it as exactly you do it with arrays. So you should note here that both of these are the same notations, whether you write pi or you write star of p plus I. So you can even use this notation with your normal arrays. Okay, perfect. So let's just execute it. So let's say I give the value of n to be 3. So these are my 3 numbers. So I get 12 bytes of memory allocated and then I print all these numbers. So currently I get some garbage values which are there because some other program left it like that. Okay. So this was the first function which you can use for dynamic memory allocation. There is one more thing with this function. So what this function tries is it tries to give you these many bytes of memory. But let's say you enter a very big number here and your computer doesn't have that much of a memory. So in that case, if something like that happens, so this malloc function returns you a null pointer. So after you try allocating certain memory with the help of malloc function, you should actually have a small sanity check here, and you should check whether this value of p is null. If the value of p is null, it actually means that the malloc function failed to assign you the memory, and you can actually print here failed, and you can just, let's say, return from here. So to show you its functionality, let's say I enter some negative value of n here. So let's say I say n is -3. So it means it should try to allocate me -12 bytes of memory, which doesn't make any sense. So when you call it, it actually malloc function returns you a null pointer. So it says that it failed in this particular case. So malloc is your first function which you use. There is one more function calloc, quite similar to malloc. The only difference is in a bit of notation. So if you use this realloc function here, so instead of just one argument, you make these two arguments, where your first argument is the number of blocks you want and your second argument is the size of individual block. So you can actually make it n, 3, n, 4, anything. There is one more difference between malloc and calloc, and this will be evident when we just run this code. So let's go ahead and run this code, and let's say I have 3 elements and I get this output. So did you notice any difference? So what was the difference when we allocated memory with the help of malloc and now? So when you did it with malloc, you got some garbage values. But when you initialize your memory, allocate your memory with the help of calloc, so it reinitializes all the memory locations with a 0 value, which is your default value. So this was much about malloc and calloc. Now the main reason why we are using these functions malloc and calloc was if in between my programs I want to extend my memory or if I want to shrink my memory. Let's say the value of n was 3 initially, and at some point in my program I realized that I need 2 more integers. So how would you do that? So I now want to extend this memory and I want to make this memory as, let's say, 5. So for that you have a function realloc. How do you use that? So this is the syntax for that. So you are reallocating the memory. So first you should write here which is the pointer for which you are reallocating the memory. So my pointer was p initially, which was given by your calloc function. I want to reallocate it memory, and then you enter the size of the new memory. So previously the size of the memory was n into your size of integer. Now I want to add 2 more elements to it. So what I'm going to make it, I want my new memory whose size is n plus 2 into your size of int, right? So what this realloc function will do now, and even realloc function you need to do a pointer typecasting. So this is your complete function realloc. What it will do is it will now look for a memory chunk which is n plus 2 into size of int, this much long. It will look for that and it will reallocate, and you can collect your result in another pointer. So I'm collecting the result in another pointer. So now will your values of p and q be the same? So p was my initial memory. So when I allocated this much memory, my first address was returned as p. Now I reallocated this memory and I collected the first address in q. So whether p will be equal to q or not will depend on how this allocation is done. So let's say my value of n was 10 previously. So we had 40 and now we need 4 bytes more. So if there are some free bytes in front of those 40 bytes, your system doesn't need to do anything. It will just extend your memory there itself. But assume that those many contiguous bytes are not available at that memory location. So in that case, it will give you a new pointer. So I'll just show you that. So let's just print here the value of both of these pointers. Let's see what was the value of p and what is the new value of q, which is your new pointer. So I'm printing here the value of p. So it tells me my initial pointer and it tells me what is my reallocated pointer. So So let's say I enter the value of n to be 3. So you can see here, so all my 3 elements are 0. If you look at P, so it was having this address. If you look at Q, it is again having the same address, which means that I was having 4 more bytes at that particular location. Okay, what if instead of 2 I make it 20,000? So let's just execute it and see. So if you now see here, these pointers have changed. So initially your memory location which was allocated to P was this, but now when you are trying to allocate space for 20,000 new integers, you couldn't find a contiguous block in your previous memory location. So now your memory location is changed, all your old data is copied to this new memory location, and the address of this new memory location is in Q. What happens to P? So P is my still pointing to this particular location, right? But the elements which were there, they are no longer mine. So now P becomes a dangling pointer. That is, P is having some value, P is pointing to some address, but whatever values are there at that address, they do not belong to me. So if I now try to access P and try to make some changes at that old location, it will show me an error. So generally what you should do in your codes is set this P to null here, or better even what we can do is instead of having a new variable Q here, let's collect back this value back in P only. Any doubt till here? Anyone? Okay. We are just left with the last function. One more thing here. So we have used here realloc to actually increase the size of the elements in the array. We can also use it to decrease the number of elements. So what if I make the new size to be n minus 2? I'm just removing 4 bytes from my previously allocated memory. So it will work well in that case also, but what will happen? So since we are removing 2 entries, those 2 entries will be deallocated, they will be truncated, and if you try to access them, you might get an error or you might see a garbage value. So let us do this and let us again. Somebody's mic is on. Do you have to ask a question? Okay, so see what I have done here is I have this point.
Ma'am, you are mute.
Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Perfect. So I'm giving, did you miss something in between?
Ma'am, this P of I array thing.
Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm just assigning each element some value which is equal to I plus 1. So your 0th element will have the value 1, first element will have the value 2, so on and so forth. Okay. So I have given here some n values. Now I'm reallocating the memory here and I'm shrinking the size of this memory. So I'm removing some 2 elements from here. But if you see here, I'm again trying to print the value for all the n elements. Let's have a printf here also so that we can see the difference between the two. Okay. So let's say my n is 5. Okay, so see in this case it has worked. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, which are my 5 elements. Now I have removed those 2 elements, but still I'm seeing these 5 values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the reason is these two elements as of now, they haven't been used by any other program. But if you do it on some other system, or maybe if you execute this program many a times, this might not be the output. So it will be something like 1, 2, 3. It might unexpectedly end here, or it might not show you any value. So let me just, instead of printing it, let me try to write something at these locations. And let's have a printf loop here so that I know how many times is it running. So what I'm doing, every time I'm printing the value of I and I'm trying to change what is there at that location. So if we okay, so you see, if we do it back, there has been some problem. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, but when we are trying to change it, so it has abruptly ended at your location 4. No, I think in this case, even it has worked perfectly. So you are able to read and write at that particular location in this particular example, which I am executing and showing it here. So when you do it on your system, every time this won't be the result. We can actually increase the size of an array, size of the memory which is allocated here, and play around with it, and you will see that there are abrupt changes in your code. We can actually try to see it. Let's say instead of 5, I make it some 100 elements. Okay, even in this case, it is running on my system. If you take it to be a very big number, it might not work. So I suggest you execute it on your system and you will notice the difference. So these were the aspects of dynamic memory allocation I wanted to discuss today. In the next lab, we'll discuss about structures, and then we'll be talking about linked list. So if you didn't understand anything or something about pointers and dynamic memory allocation, you have next half an hour. You can ask your doubts with me. Otherwise, you might have a tough time understanding the programs for linked list and trees, and maybe later on graphs. Any doubts? You can ask me if you have any doubts, otherwise you can leave.
Is there any attendance?
I have noted down the attendance from the list of participants.
Okay. Okay, ma'am.
So the int star we have used here at this particular location, this int star, this is typecasting here. So whatever pointer is returned to me by this calloc function, I'm actually typecasting it to an integer pointer. So you can actually do your typecasting with the normal variables also. So let's say you have a floating number which you want to typecast to an integer. So you can actually do something like, and let's say my number is 5.3333. So this particular thing here, this is a typecasting. So I can have something like this. So this thing here is a typecast. Similarly, this thing here, it's a typecast.
Ma'am? Hello.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yes, tell me.
Yeah, ma'am. Ma'am, if we have an array, like I have a question from assignment. Ma'am, if we want to move the arrays like some right side, like if we want to keep an array in between, like fourth position, fifth position, how do we shift the remaining arrays to side, like?
Do you mean you want to shift all the elements of the array towards right
That,
or maybe towards
yeah,
left?
yeah. Towards right, ma'am.
Towards right.
Ma'am, if we have 5 arrays and I want to add an extra element of array in the fourth position, then the fifth and sixth position should be moved to left, right, no, ma'am. Like, fifth should go
Okay.
to six, six should go to seven. How do you move that?
You can do that with the help of an iterator. So it's simple. It's your question is simply adding an element in an array, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You can use an iterator. So I think we have done it in the previous lab. So see, let's say your array is of size 10 and you want to insert something at your location 6. So what you can do is start an iterator I which goes from 10 to 6. So first time when it is 10, you move your element which is there at location 10 to the 11th location. You can do that, right?
Yeah, okay, yes, ma'am.
So if your I is 10, you can do something like A of I plus 1 equals to A of I. Then you decrement I, then you do that with the element which is at 9th position. You duplicate it to the 10th position.
And then we can
So
come
on
to
and
six.
so forth. You can come back up to your 6th location.
Thank you, ma'am.